All right, thank you everyone for coming out to lecture tonight. I don't have a slide deck ready, but just a quick announcement. The final portion of our project has been released. It's the Friends microservice, and you have until Thanksgiving break to finish it. That's like when the recommended deadline is. We'll probably have our autograder out by then. But for today, we're going to be having a guest speaker. My Microsoft recruiter Brian Quadra helped me out in my process to land a Microsoft internship for last summer. So yeah, we'll start off with a little bit about his role in Microsoft, and then we can kind of take it from there. We can take a recruiting angle. You guys can ask him questions. And yeah, thank you, Brian, for volunteering to do this talk. You can take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for the invitation, Ari. I'm so happy that our paths crossed this year, although they never passed in person. I know you were an intern with us this summer, and it was great to hear that you had a positive experience with us. And hopefully, if there's some questions that we get asked today about the experience, you can kind of chime in. And there might be others, on the call that have interned with Microsoft in the past, or who've applied, or maybe have corresponded with me via email. So I'm excited to connect with all of you. Like Ari mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft as a company. We'll start by me telling you a little bit more about me. We'll talk about Microsoft and the recruiting process, and then again we'll be open to Q&A. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have and help you out the way I best can. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to see if this works. I've never quite done a screen share like this. Let's see here, slideshow. I should know better, right? Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And then Ari, I don't have access to the chat, but if there's anything urgent, feel free to just come off mute and let me know. If not, we can also address any questions that come up during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Cool. All right. So like I mentioned, our plan today is to tell you a little bit more about me, a little bit more about Microsoft and how we hire, and then again, open up for Q&A. So for those of you I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Brian. I'm a university recruiter with Microsoft. I've been with the company now for about 5 years, which is pretty wild. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the roles that I've had over these last 5 years. It feels like every 2 years I've moved into something different. I am a San Francisco native, so if we've got Bay Area folks on the call, shout out to you all. I grew up in San Francisco. I went to high school in Daly City, and I almost went to Cal myself. I ended up going to UCLA. I think I was kind of lured by the sunshine and the idea of moving away, far away from my parents. So I'm a UCLA alum, but I love Cal. I have a bunch of friends that have gone to school at Berkeley, and I myself have had paid many a visit to Cal in the past. My focus now, my current role at Microsoft, is to essentially recruit, the best and the brightest students from almost 9 schools in the Bay Area, including Cal and Stanford, which are 2 of the largest schools that I recruit at. Every year we hire hundreds of students. In my pipeline, which is software engineering, we typically hire about 250 students. So it's a very high volume job, but it's also like an incredibly fulfilling one. I get to work with incredibly passionate students. And one thing that I really love to focus on in my role is thinking about equity and trying to find ways that we can make access to, the opportunities at Microsoft as equitable as possible. One of the first roles that I ever had at Microsoft was actually international recruiting. So for a period of time, my Instagram was way cooler than I ever will be. I got to travel anywhere from Australia, China, India, South America, you name it. I had the chance to represent Microsoft and to bring on students from all over. It was a really challenging job, especially when you think about visas and relocation, and just the logistics of being in all these places, but it was something that I, remember very fondly. After my international role, I worked specifically in Florida and Texas, recruiting students from Hispanic serving institutions. And that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Since then, I have, like I mentioned earlier, relocated to San Francisco, which is, home for me. I spent 5 years in Seattle, or 4 years in Seattle, before I moved back to the Bay last August. My time back has been a little different than I expected, obviously, but it's been lovely to be back in California and closer to my family. Stanford and Cal are my focus. And then we have schools on the periphery that we also make it a point to recruit students from. So that's a little bit more about me. I'm going to pivot now and talk to you all a little bit more about Microsoft and, our mission and the values that we find really important. And this is, the research that I'd encourage all of you to do when you think about where you'd like to work. I know some of you might be more familiar with Microsoft since we're a larger company, but for those of you who, are less familiar, our mission is specifically to empower the world, to build technology that empowers people to achieve more. This is a pretty broad statement. I think it's tough when you're such a big company, but the more time I've spent working at Microsoft, the more I really understand why this is so impactful and why it's so important. The first thing to note is that our customers are everyone. We don't just build technology for, certain parts of the world or for, luxury products that only certain people can afford. Microsoft's mission is really to create technology that is like democratized and really revolutionizes the way we get anything done. I think another really important part is this word empowerment. It's about like reimagining what technology can do and in many instances, reimagining what technology should do and like asking ourselves like the really big questions around the ethics of AI or what a tech company's role is in controlling climate change or addressing racial injustice. Like Microsoft, for me represents, kind of like the ethical company that I think is paying attention to the bigger picture. And that's something that I personally am, really proud of. And it's something that's certainly kept me at the company. When we talk about, some of these, the mission, behind that mission, there are like a slew of values that make up our culture. And I encourage all of you to really like do research on what the culture is like at every company that you seriously consider working for. I think, when I started at Microsoft, I didn't really know what these, concepts were. Maybe I've heard about them, but to see these kind of being lived, on a daily basis at this company and to see how, we continue to evolve as a company that's like not only, doing well, but one that is increasingly more inclusive and, constantly pushing the bill on what like a healthy work environment can look like. The biggest ones for me, I'd say are, the growth mindset piece is like understanding that failure isn't something that we shy away from, understanding that we are eager to learn, we're eager to learn from our mistakes, we're eager to not shy away from, having a, we avoid having a fixed mindset, we avoid thinking we know everything, and we look for that same thing in students. We look for students that are like eager to learn and to, learn from their mistakes specifically. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it is that we look for when we identify candidates later in this presentation. But the second thing that I'd say is like really important to me is our culture of being a diverse and inclusive workforce. I can, say from experience that joining my team, I was very different. I was, the only person that had come from a nonprofit background. I'd worked in education for the first 5 years of my career. And, almost more notably, I was one of the only Latinx people on my team. And instead of feeling like, my perspective might be discounted because I was in this like small minority of people on my team, the opposite was true. Actually, everyone leaned in and was curious to hear my perspective. And since then, I've been really empowered, just like our mission statement says, to like continue to bring the things that I'm passionate about to work, and to, bring my perspectives, and to not be shy about like, being my full self, which is something that is so different from the experiences I've had working in, high schools, which were specifically like Catholic high schools, just a very different culture of openness and inclusivity. And nothing against Catholic schools, but it was just a different environment. That said, we're going to move on a little bit and tell you a little bit more about like the roles that we hire for. I will start by mentioning that, we're pretty late in the recruitment cycle. And I think many of you are familiar with the fact that big tech companies specifically are really eager to hire students right at the beginning of the season. So we typically open our roles in August, and then we do heavy recruitment in September and October. Those are really busy interview and email months for us. So if you've reached out to me during that time, you probably noticed my responses are delayed. But that said, we hire for at this stage, we're mostly wrapped with recruiting, but this is still relevant information for those of you who are thinking about, applying in the next year, or just to understand what the opportunities look like more broadly. We offer 2 different internships. Specifically, we have an Explore internship for students that are early in their career. So if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you're looking to get exposure to, program management and software engineering, the Explore internship is a really great option. And we're looking for students specifically that haven't quite had much industry experience quite yet. If you're a junior, we're inviting you to apply for the university internship. We typically prioritize students that are, entering they're interning the summer before they graduate. And then finally, we have full-time opportunities that we hire for every year. I included this slide to tell you a little bit more about the differences between like the Explore internship and the university internship. The biggest takeaways here is that, instead of rotating between software engineering and program management like you would in the Explore internship, in the university internship, you just have one discipline. And instead of working, collaboratively with 2 pod mates in the Explore internship, you'll work more independently in the university internship. We hire across a variety of disciplines. So, if you're a computer science major, that's awesome because, we have a ton of opportunities within development. So specifically within software engineering. But if you're, somebody who's studying data science, or someone who's hardware, inclined, we have open roles for that as well. I think one caveat that I typically, tell students is that we are a software company. So by large numbers, most of our opportunities exist within the software engineering discipline. In terms of, how to apply, it's a fairly straightforward process. We encourage students to apply as early in the school year as possible. Like I mentioned, those applications opened mid-August this year. We conduct resume reviews as part of our, recruitment process. I work with a team of mostly Berkeley and Stanford alumni that volunteer their time every week to help me review resumes. We get together on calls. I coach them on, the things that we look for in a resume, and they make nominations for students that they think we should, screen at the first round. If you're selected for, a first round screen, you'll hear from an interview scheduler. They set you up with a 30-minute phone interview. This year, these were all virtual. So we had a virtual coding platform called Codility, where you were asked a blend of technical and behavioral questions. And then if that went well, you'd move on to the final round interview. And those are a little bit more in depth. They're also on Codility, but instead of having this 30-minute interview, you might have 2 to 4, 45-minute interviews. So they're a little more lengthy and in depth. And then finally, we offer candidates, and we typically are pretty good at getting back to you within a week of your interview. I want to, talk specifically about what it is that we look for and how we hire students. And hopefully this is helpful to you all in thinking about, the way you frame your resume and the way you think about, applying to some of these big companies. And the first thing I'll say is that applying as a student can feel particularly, daunting because, you don't have years and years of experience typically. And I want you to know that Microsoft doesn't expect, college hires to be experts or, super, specialized. We recognize that, most of your work history or like our recommendations for hire are essentially based on like your potential for success as opposed to like proven excellence always. And another piece that I want to highlight is, hiring, based on the passion that you bring to your work. And there's a variety of ways that you can demonstrate that. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about this like concept of passion because I think oftentimes we get that confused with like an extroverted, if you're an extrovert, you clearly demonstrate passion in one way, but there's a variety of ways, even if you're super introverted, to demonstrate that you're passionate about technology. So the things that I would ask, yourself is, what makes you excited about technology specifically? How do you spend your time outside of school? That's something that we're really curious about when we're looking at your resume. One of the biggest mistakes that I see, Berkeley students make is that, they're brilliant, like super smart, and you obviously have to be to get into Berkeley in the first place. But we oftentimes see resumes that look very similar to one another because everyone is doing the same school projects and they're putting those projects on their resume. They're taking the same courses and they're listing the same coursework on their resumes. Berkeley is a pretty competitive space. There's a lot of students that apply from your school every year. And I don't mean that to intimidate you. I just mean that to encourage you to think about the things that make you unique. And oftentimes the way you answer these questions will be specific to you. You might have, some personal projects that you've led. You might have had leadership roles or involvement in like student orgs, or, you've participated in a hackathon and, maybe you have something, that you are kind of, spending your time on continuing to learn. Those are really good indicators to us that you could run with the opportunity at Microsoft. And the reason why that's so important is because we can teach you so many things as a new hire. I'm sure if you asked Ari about his internship and the things that he, did on his project and on his team, a lot of the stuff he did probably was taught to him, as part of his internship experience versus like, him needing to come in as an expert in X technology. But what we couldn't teach Ari, we can teach him all those things. What we couldn't teach Ari is to be passionate, to, and Ari teaching this course is like a perfect example of someone who goes above and beyond to create opportunities and to continue to like, flex those parts of their brain that keeps them curious. So feel, encouraged by that. You don't always have to, start your own course to stand out, but there's a lot of even little things that you can do to help distinguish yourself. When we talk about potential, other things that we're looking for in your resume is like, we want to know how eager you might be to like learn and to grow. So like oftentimes we'll ask you in an interview, like, how did you grow through like a really big challenge? And those are pretty common interview questions, but that's like particularly important to us at Microsoft because we want to see that people have that growth mindset, and we want to see that people aren't going to come in to the company thinking they know everything, not knowing how to ask for help, not really willing to collaborate with their teammates. I'm curious to hear, about Ari's experience on his team. Maybe he can share a little later, but that's like a big piece to our culture, is having this idea that you can, fail miserably and also like know that, you have the opportunity to grow and learn from that, and that people aren't afraid to fail along the way, or to like understand that we're not like, no one is like an expert, and that we all will, get things wrong, and that we're open to that growth. So when you think about potential, like think about the way you're challenging yourself now, like, and if you're earlier in your career, really look for opportunities to like grow by putting yourself in those like tough situations, like by reaching out for that like leadership position that you thought was really hard, or by maybe stepping up to be a TA without the discomfort. growth is hard, and I'm sure you all are familiar with some of that already, having made it as far as you have. But those are some of the things that we look for specifically. I want to open it up to Q&A, and if Ari maybe wanted to start off by just telling us a little bit more about his project, that might be like helpful, and maybe he can speak to like his experience in the virtual space too, because I know that was a little different.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about the recruiting process first, just so they can like, I guess, get some firsthand experience. The recruiting process was very straightforward, and it was very accommodating. So it starts off with your application. So I did apply sometime in August. The phone interview honestly did not feel like an actual interview. It felt like a genuine conversation that I was like talking to someone, and they were like genuinely interested. Like, what makes you passionate? What makes you excited? Where do you see yourself like taking this passion? And like Brian said, you don't have to be like super extroverted. Your passion is really demonstrated by what you do, especially when no one's looking. So like, if you're working on a super secret project, like, if you're passionate about a certain cause, you could work on maybe making an app that, getting a few friends together, making an app. So that was like the phone interview. It was very chill. I was super stressed leading up to it. But once I started having the conversation, like, they just asked like, what makes you excited? They asked a lot of growth mindset questions. The onsite, then after that was, I believe, the onsite. So this would be like in a non-COVID semester. The onsite was they fly you out to Seattle to actually do to interview with a few people. I think I did two. Both interviewers were very like, I don't know, they felt like they were always trying to like help you through and see how your internal your mind's internals worked, rather than seeing if you got the correct solution or not. Because I'm almost certain that in like my second on-site interview, I didn't actually get the perfect solution, but I was like, my thought process was good enough that it was enough for them. So that was like the interview process. The summer, unfortunately, the internship did go virtual. I was very disappointed by that. We were supposed to have like a gathering with Brian and a few other Microsoft interns on the Berkeley campus for everyone that was like, gonna intern from Berkeley. That unfortunately got canceled. But honestly, the virtual internship experience was super, super smooth. Like, I honestly have no idea how they put it together. And I honestly don't think Brian does either. It's so my project was cloud and security related. So it did encompass a lot of the things that we learned here in this class. So we talked about Kubernetes before. So the project was actually deployed on Kubernetes. So that's like something I had to learn about. But basically, a lot of the cloud is automated, and you have millions and even billions of cloud files being uploaded and downloaded without any like moderation. Some of those might be sensitive. So my project was, we're going to analyze like the extensions of those files to determine if they're sensitive, and build an insights tool for companies to actually see what files they might have in the cloud. And Brian did mention like making an impact earlier. Even interns get to make an impact. Like, I think that any intern that has a project at Microsoft gets their code deployed somewhere within, like on like publicly or internally. You really do make a difference. I believe my project is actually going into public preview in a few months. So the internship experience, super nice. Lots of growth mindset stuff. There was so much I had no idea about once I like found out about my project, but my team was like super accommodating. They set me up with some like, some guides, some videos. Microsoft has a partnership with a service like LinkedIn Learning. They gave me the first 2 weeks to just learn everything that I needed to know. There was no pressure. It was just, people really value you as a person at Microsoft. So that's like what I really, really enjoyed. So that's like my 2 cents on why you should consider internship and full-time opportunity at Microsoft.
Cool, I love it. Definitely open to any questions that we might have. Do we have any in the chat, Ari?
Looks like looks like we have a question already. Is it usually okay if freshmen and sophomores talk about stuff from high school during their interviews, or are college-related things preferred more?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's totally fair game for freshmen to talk about, the things that they've done in high school because it's not expected that you've done much in college yet. As a sophomore, I think that, hopefully, you've done a little bit more in college. So I would say maybe less high school things. I'd say that's still generally relevant. Like a sophomore's resume, I don't think having high school things is off the table. I think it's actually like still fair. I mean, 2 years ago, it's still fairly relevant. Um, I would encourage you as you start your college career to continue to build experiences and things that put on your resume. Even participation in a hackathon is something that you can put on there. Yeah, so it depends on how far along you are in college, but I see things from high school all the time, and I don't necessarily like ding a candidate for that.
Thank you. So we got two more questions, so we can just go in the order that they came in. What do you find most valuable in a potential new hire that would help them succeed?
Yeah, we have this term called learn it all versus know it all, and I've alluded to that earlier, but I think that's like a really big one. Um, I think that alongside that, I think oftentimes teams are excited about hiring interns and excited about hiring new grads because of the injection of perspective that you all bring. And because you are all so early in your career, like your perspective is inherently bringing like very new energy to a team that might be a little more senior. And I don't know if you felt that, Ari, on your team, like if most of your teammates were perhaps like a little more senior, but oftentimes I see teams having an intern come in and they all lean in. They're like, cool, like this person is going to perhaps need a little more coaching or teaching when it comes to like these technologies. But once they learn how to swim, like they're gonna be teaching us certain things, or they're gonna help us foresee different gaps. So I would say that being ready to like collaborate and articulate your perspectives and to be an active participant and all of that in what happens in your team is something that is particularly valuable. And the better you get at practicing verbalizing and collaborating and driving for results before you get to an industry job or an internship, the better you're going to be at it. That's one thing that I don't think I really learned until I started working at Microsoft, is that like, hey, my opinion matters and I should share my ideas. Like, even if they're half baked, I think like most people will come to value them if I can, continue to like be vocal. And there's different ways to do that. Ari, what was your team like? I'm curious, like in terms of like seniority level, and did you feel that a little?
Just a little bit. I think my manager and my mentor were like senior level, but like there was a bunch of like there was like one new grad and like one hire that was like 2 years in. So it was like there was like a spectrum. I didn't really feel like left out. I feel like whenever I wanted to suggest something, people were like always like willing to listen to it, and not the kind of listen to it where like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, let's move on. I suggested a change to like the testing suite for one of our code bases, and they actually ended up like saying, all right, we like it, now you should be go ahead and implement it. It was like, wow, like my voice is actually heard. They actually like value like any perspective that you might bring, even if you're not like the most technically like sound, like you don't know like a specific library or something, they're always willing to see like, what can you think of that we might not have thought of yet. So it was, yeah, it was a great experience. It was like I feel like the seniority gap doesn't really like make a difference. I feel like it was just like talking to coworkers.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. Yeah. So I'd say, yeah, openness, the ability to collaborate, yeah, is probably
Yeah,
something that they look forward to.
yeah,
What's that next question?
yeah. So this is probably going to be the biggest question of the night. What
Uh-oh.
kind of stuff do Microsoft recruiters look for in resumes? I feel like that's something that we like that can be shared by recruiters mindsets everywhere, and it's a question shared by students everywhere too. Like, what do
Yeah.
you guys look for?
Yeah. So the big things that I coach my teams to look for, the very first thing is, your graduation date. And that sounds really simple. but we need to know when you're going to graduate so that we can know what role you're really eligible for. So that's like kind of table stakes. Like we just want to know where the bar's at. If you're, graduating in, this May, then you're a full-time candidate, and we're going to have, perhaps a higher expectation for a full-time candidate than we would for someone graduating, in 2022, for example. So grad date is something that we are definitely looking for. The second thing we want to know is what your academic background looks like. And as part of that, sometimes we'll take into account what your GPA looks like, but it's not something that we're like, there's no checklist. I will say, I mean, maybe there's 4 things that I'm going to tell you now that we look for generally, but GPA isn't like a specific thing that's on there. I would also say, as I describe some of these 4 things, that I coach all of the people who review resumes to think about, a resume as like being something that's full of clues to tell us more about a student. And sometimes we get like good clues that indicate that the student could be, really great at Microsoft. And then sometimes we get clues that are like not so great. And we think like, okay, well, maybe, but more than anything, it's the absence of clues that really will like mess someone up. The only like negative clue I can think of is like if you have like just a really poor GPA, like you probably shouldn't include it. And if you did include it, I would be like, where's your judgment? I'd be like, this is just not helpful to you. And that's like never happens. Like most people who don't have great GPAs don't include it. And that's kind of where the GPA conversation like starts and ends. It's only like a great thing. Other things that we are looking for beyond your academic background is like just how much, experience you've had with the technical piece. So I'm talking specifically about like software engineering candidates. We want to see if how proficient you might be in an object-oriented programming language. And it's not enough to have like a skills section where you just say like, Java, like proficient in Java, or you have like 5 out of 5 stars filled out. Like that to us doesn't have any relevance, and it's completely subjective. We don't know who made up the scale, or like sometimes people have bars on the resume, and it's not a terrible thing to include on there as a summary. But what I'm really looking for are experiences that you've had where you've coded in an object-oriented programming language and built something meaningful and then had impact. And so when we're looking through, your bulleted points under any experience that you've had, we want to know that you've had impact, and we can have some confidence that your technical skills are going to be strong enough to pass a coding interview. Not every student is going to have experience. Like, the age-old question is like, how do I get an internship if I need to have an internship in order to get an internship? And like, how do I get experience if I don't have experience? We hire a bunch of interns that have never had internships. And, typically those students, maybe they've had personal projects, or maybe they've done research, or maybe they've, participated in hackathons. Maybe they're leaders in organizations, and we can see their potential in different ways. And then, we take a chance on them for an internship because we're hiring students based on their potential. And oftentimes, students that indicate that they're interested in learning will come to Microsoft and they'll learn and they'll crush it. And then they'll, or they'll go somewhere else and they'll learn and they'll crush it, and they'll come back later to us. So we're outside of like the experience piece and like the technical thing, we're then looking for things that are going to distinguish you. And oftentimes those things might look like leadership, or they might look like awards, or they might look like TAing engagements or extracurricular involvements, or maybe it's, you're a student athlete, and on top of like being a computer science major, you are, legit in practice 5 days a week. Like that's something that helps us understand how you manage your time, and, what kind of perspective you might bring to Microsoft. So those are like the general, I'd say, like, yeah, things we're looking for. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm just typing up those 4 things. Let's see. Just for people to read in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so another question from Rohan is, what specific things have made past candidates really stand out?
Yeah. I would say people that really take advantage
Oh,
of
you're
their.
still sharing your screen, by the way.
Oh, I am. Okay, cool. Let me actually stop sharing because I'm gonna pull something up. I have a doc that I just want to make sure that those four things align with what I actually tell people all the time.
Yeah, Rohan, we'll get to your question in a second. And feel free to keep like the questions coming. We have 15 or so minutes left.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna actually just quickly share my screen again, and then just and then people are welcome to like screenshot this if it's helpful. But this is what, I tell folks that we're like scanning for, like graduation date. We want to know their eligibility. We want to know what pipeline you're in. So like your academic background, if you're a software candidate or hardware candidate. And then 3 is those applicable skills and experiences. And then 4 is like things that set you apart. So like those are either personal projects, leadership, community involvement, indicators of passion. So hopefully that gives everyone like a visual for like what those 4 things are. And I did get them right, which I'm
Yeah.
really.
Would you mind sharing the slides that you presented after?
Yeah, I don't mind actually. I can I'll just copy that over.
All right. All right. So back to Rohan's
Oh,
question.
yeah.
Yeah. What made past candidates really stand out?
I would say students that took advantage of like whatever resources they had available to them. I think that sometimes it's a little harder at Berkeley because you guys have like like more resources like and just companies in your backyard than other students do. Like when I recruited in El Paso, I remember being very blown away by students that like really had to like scrounge and get scrappy to find opportunity, and when there was an opportunity they like created that. So that's those type of things is what I think I'm particularly impressed by, when students can overcome coming from perhaps like an underserved neighborhood or like a really rough public school, and then getting to Berkeley and then doing their things or finding ways to serve their community. I think like that's just something that I keep an eye out for, is like students that are like minded around the bigger picture, because that's something that's so important to us as a company, is that bigger picture. But that's not required. I think that's just something that wows us, is that like bigger picture impact thing.
All right. Hopefully that answered your question, Rohan. I have a question myself. So we know like that projects, like having a way to showcase that you actually built something is really, really good for students, especially students that don't have an internship yet.
Yeah.
But so those are like a lot of things that you look for. What are a few things that are red flags in resumes or interviews? Like what makes you like look at this at a resume and think this is like the worst place, like Microsoft is not the place for this student?
Yeah. I would say like the absence of experience is usually like really hard. Like if you have like just like very few relevant experiences on there, that's like probably the most common thing that I see. Second, like red flag or like bad clue, I'd say I see is like a poor, GPA. Other things that I'm surprised that I still see are like just blatant typos with like their resume. Like you can tell that they have not like had anyone review their resume, and like that's just like table stakes. Like when I look at a resume and I can't find when they're gonna graduate, or what school they go to, or like what their major is, because it's just really poorly formatted. It's not a deal breaker. It just makes our jobs as people who are scanning hundreds of resumes in a short period of time very difficult, and it's not the kind of delay you want to create for anyone who's reviewing a resume. It's just like not a good way to start. And then the third thing, and this is pretty common, and we see this more often in interviews, is when we meet someone who has like, quite frankly, an arrogance about what they know, and they're unwilling to learn from their mistakes, and they're kind of braggadocious. And I've seen brilliant people come to the final round interviews, and this happened, specifically when I was traveling internationally. You'd meet someone who was like top of their class, and like, that's what got them to the interviews, but in their ability to collaborate with their interviewer was completely lacking, or their awareness, for some of the things that, they were doing in an interview was also really lacking. They weren't asking for feedback. They weren't asking clarifying questions. Those are generally not good indicators that, you know, they would be good teammates. So I would encourage all of you to like practice interviewing and really get comfortable with feedback, not avoid it as something that is like painful or hurtful. It's just an opportunity to grow, because oftentimes your peers can tell you what you can't see if you don't already have some of that awareness.
All right, thank you for that answer. We have another question that's project related and skills related. Like, what are the top 3 type of projects or skills that a software engineer should have? Example, like a personal website.
Yeah, I would say at a basic level, we need them to be proficient in an object-oriented programming language. We need students to there's no like hard and fast requirement. So I guess finishing that statement is hard. I would just say the things that you really want to do is stand out. And you can do that by doing a lot of the things that I had mentioned earlier, which are like indicate your passion through things that you do outside of school, and indicate your potential by like showing us that you've done more than just your basic classwork.
All right. All right. So hopefully, Matthew, that answers your question. I think it's Raghavir. How do you use LinkedIn to recruit students?
I don't use it at all. So I actually I feel a little like hijacked on LinkedIn. Like my whole world is like, you know, Microsoft on there, and it's a lot of students reaching out to me, and I I feel very rude sometimes because I never respond, and mostly because like my LinkedIn is my LinkedIn, and I'm probably an exception to the recruiting population that like really, you know, love engaging with students on LinkedIn. Like I'm not one of those people, and my team knows that, and they've, you know, I think we're all free to use our LinkedIn's however we'd like to, and I think for a lot of people that is a tool in their toolbox. It's not something that I use because I have so many students that are reaching out to me via email already, and so many students that are applying online, and so many students that we connect with through, you know, the career fairs and student programs and student groups. I would say that LinkedIn is helpful. However, in understanding some more context. So what my recommendation to every student here is, regardless of whether or not I use it, sometimes it's nice to not have a 1-page limit like you do on your resume. Your resume can only tell so much, but then when you have like a live LinkedIn page with something as like, you know, contextual as like your photo, and then links to things that you've worked on and the projects that you've done, like your GitHub or the organizations you've worked for. And then for a recruiter to be able to like quickly scan through that and then drill down into things, and click on the live links versus reviewing a paper resume or some, you know, weird version of your resume that pops up through the online application. Leverage that, like tell your story. I mean, I would really encourage you to have like a compelling bio. I do often look up students just so I can like remember who their faces are. And it's helpful for when I meet people in real life, because then I'll have a little bit more of like a face thing, especially with the number of students that I meet. And oftentimes I'll be curious about a student, but then their resume is just not great. And I won't stop there always. Sometimes I'm like, I'm going to look this person up because I need to know when they graduate most often. But then other times I will, you know, just be curious about what this project was about. And then I'll see reviews, and then there's all this other information. So manage your brand, own it. Like, you guys are digital natives. You've been familiar with profiles since you were very young. So generally speaking, so I would say that treat your LinkedIn seriously, and know that many recruiters do look at it, even though I don't.
All right, cool. So another question is, what are some cool perks, resources, and events that new interns get access to at Microsoft? Do you want me to answer this question?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. First, I'm going to list off that there's so many perks that I honestly don't remember them all. And there's really cool events. So I'll start off with like perks. Like, yes, Microsoft is generous enough to give paid internships. They also pay for your housing. They also like, you know, pay for your flight to and from on-site interviews. So like financially, they're very generous. Perks. I guess like I'll start off with there's lots of digital learning resources. So there's literally like 2 to 3 tech talks every single week that you can go to if you want. And like as long as you just tell your manager like, hey, I want to go to this tech talk, it's completely fine with them. So there's so much to learn, and they're literally like events and tech talks for literally pretty much anything that you can think of. And they're not, a lot of them aren't even tech related. Some of them are focused on increasing diversity in the workplace. Some of them are like focused on increasing, like increasing support for nonprofit organizations. Some of them are very tech oriented, like how to use AI to solve a specific problem. You'll honestly never run out of things to learn at Microsoft in terms of like learning resources, which I loved. I think what an interesting perk about Microsoft is that you get two 1-year subscriptions to Xbox Game Pass, which lets you play, which lets you it's a subscription service that lets you download games, as many games as you want while you still have that service. The biggest event, it got cut short this year, but the biggest event every single summer for Microsoft is Intern Day. That's when Microsoft really shows its appreciation for interns. Like you get like Intern Day hoodies and like other swag. But the actual event is literally just one giant concert for only Microsoft interns. They literally fly every single Microsoft intern around the world to, I think it's in Seattle, right? And they hold a giant like concert for them. So that would be in like a non-COVID environment.
Yeah.
So there's like the event, and there's also Puzzle Day, where they have the weirdest puzzles you've ever seen. It's they're all like they're like, some of them are visual, some of them are like technical, like encoding based. But yeah, that's Puzzle Day. Intern Day this year was actually a panel of guest speakers from like a variety of different backgrounds. Like we had, I think we did have Bill Gates speak at the very beginning. One of the speakers I remember is Malala. She talked a little bit during the guest speaker panel. And then at the end, we did have like a mini concert. Microsoft contacted Griffin to DJ in his backyard for like 15 minutes at the end of Intern Day. So there's just a lot of different things that you can like gain, like in terms of just pure swag, in terms of like once in a lifetime experiences, in terms of just learning, that I think it makes it an amazing place to work, and like both intern and full time. Like there was just so many like I know like Google has like the thing where you spend 80% of your time like working on like your project, and then 20% of the time is like side project that might benefit the company. Microsoft it has like a great work-life balance where you're never like really worrying about like like work outside of work, and they're always like focusing on you, growing you as a person, even if you may not return to Microsoft in the near future, because they're always like willing to reach out and say, hey, do you want to come back? But yeah, those are just some of the cool perks that I like read. There's too many. They literally have a list of them, and I couldn't like get through them all. But
You
yeah,
got
that's
most
my
of them. You got more than I would have been able to list off. Yeah, the only thing I would add is that Intern Day this year was actually hosted by Trevor Noah, which was like such a cool surprise from me. I was like, I'm a big fan, so that was really cool.
Yeah.
Do we have time for?
I think we have time for like one more question, if you guys want to ask. And if there's like crickets, I can ask one more question from my pool that I prepared just in case. All right. I guess one quick question I'll just ask is, okay, I guess there's another question here. Best hire yet?
Oh gosh.
That's an interesting one.
I feel like I'm always excited about hiring, like leaders and like influencers specifically. So like sometimes, when we hire the president of an organization, it feels like there's a ripple effect there. So yeah, I've probably no one that you guys know personally, but there's a few people, especially in places where we've been like trying to build pipelines, that's been helpful. But yeah, nothing notable on my end. What was your question, Ari? I'm curious now.
I honestly forgot. So I don't. I think it was another. It was between two students of academic backgrounds and like project experiences. What would you like? How would you differentiate them?
That's really hard. I mean, that's one of the hardest things we have to do all the time. I thankfully don't have that many limits on how many students I can screen. So if I'm torn between the two, I can typically send both, or I'll create an opportunity to send the second one. What's trickier is when we have final round interview opportunities, and I have two candidates that have both been recommended to move forward, and then I only have one spot. I typically will go into their feedback and I will like tear it apart. I will like try to find any differences that I can. And sometimes it's very competitive. And actually, this is a really good thing to note. Sometimes there are so many more factors about getting hired that are outside of your control and have nothing to do with your skills. Sometimes, students just apply too late, and that has nothing to do with whether or not they're qualified for the job. They just happened to apply in late October, and by then we had finished identifying most of the students that we then had decided to move forward with. And maybe they were more qualified than the students that we had met in August. So I would say, as you apply to jobs, take it all with a grain of salt, because like the myth of meritocracy is, not an exact science. I think we all as companies are trying to hire, the best talent, but there's always, constraints on our ability to do that. There's an incredibly limited number of students that we can hire compared to the number of students who apply. So know that, it's not an exact science, and know that, the best thing that you can do as a student is to continue to challenge yourself to learn and to continue to put yourself out there. Oftentimes, it's a numbers game, and like certain number of no's will lead to one yes. And earlier in your career, all you need is, one person to say yes and to take that risk on you, especially if you don't have that much experience. And then from there, you can really jump and catapult and make your way through and build yourself a career. But don't feel this pressure to be all the way there all the time, because it takes time.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to piggyback off of that. So I did interview for Microsoft in like fall 19. I sent out over like 100 applications to so many different companies and probably multiple positions within Microsoft. And my only interview and only offer ended up being Microsoft. So all you really need is that one yes to kind of like launch you into whatever you want to do. But I'm just gonna like cut it off there. Thank you, so because we're a little bit out of time. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Brian, for hosting this Q&A. I'm sure that students found it really helpful. I think Shane and I can debrief with you back in the breakout room. But yeah, Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. So I'll join the breakout room.